So one thing that I think is super important is obviously varying your instruction, because all students learn very differently from one another. Every single student is unique. So some ways that I could vary instruction in my classroom would just be bouncing between different styles of lessons, whether that means doing a lecture or have the class fill out a chart together, having them work in small groups or with a partner, or there are certain activities that definitely would be best just with each student working alone. I think also the format, and if you are doing some form of a lecture or just like a presentation to the whole class, I think the form in which you present it is very important. Having a PowerPoint that has lots of visual aspects to it kind of takes into consideration those visual learners, as well as having like the words to explain it below for whoever reaches it the best, as well as speaking about what's on the PowerPoint out loud, and that way different students are getting what they may need out of the lesson, whether that is hearing you speak, seeing these images that represent what you're talking about, or actually reading the words. And then definitely making any resources that you share with them available for them to look back on, because some students may need to look over something more than once to pick up on a concept, or just to study it, or whatever they need to do. I think also, like I said, having a combination of different types of work, like group work, partner work, individual work, because some students love working alone, some students love always working with someone else. And obviously there are times when like both of those aren't appropriate, but just mixing it up so that you're not in a classroom. If you have a student that is miserable doing, work with one other partner, if that's all you do the whole year, then they're not going to have a good year. So just making sure to always change it up and try new things, because you're not always going to reach every single student at once, but the least you can do is try and reach as many as possible at once. And if not all at once, then hopefully just as much as you can. I was going to answer the question, what types of considerations must be made when planning to use computers in a classroom, for part 2 of our discussion. I think this is a newer part of the whole education system. Not new, but newer, just how much technology is being integrated into like everything we do, including school systems. And I think it's good and bad. Like, it has its pros and its cons, obviously, like anything. I think one thing to take into consideration, is a big one, is just technology. Technology is not always dependable. It's just like, there's going to be glitches, there's going to be issues with power, or issues with something you don't know why it's not working, whether that's a computer or a printer or a projector or anything. I think that's always important to remember, that it's super easy to have a plan out and say the computers are going to be used for this amount of time, etc. And something may go wrong, and I think you have to have patience with that. Another consideration is the age level that you're using it at, and for what you're using it, because I would say now most kids like grow up with like that technology, like a computer in their house. Or not most kids, a lot of kids grow up knowing how to use computers and phones, but there are certain things like you have to make a judgment call for what is appropriate for their level and what will actually be of use to them. So you're not just telling them to go play games that educational games can be helpful, but if games that are not actually advancing their learning at all. So taking into consideration like what is the best way to use the technology, because it's definitely a very valuable resource. I was in a classroom this past semester, and while the teacher worked in small groups with students, the rest of the class would be working on a game system that they had like an account for. That was like educational games, but as I was walking around, I was noticing none of them were taking it seriously and like actually using it for that purpose, which is just to me like a complete waste of class time. They could be doing a lot of other things in that time, even though the teacher was working with smaller groups of students. So, other considerations as far as homework goes is knowing what the availability of technology is at home if you're going to assign something that needs to be finished at home or that needs to be brought home. Obviously, not all students are going to have that type of resource to go back to or have like any access to it at all. So definitely take that into consideration. Yeah, I think that's all for discussion 3.